Welcome back to another video, Broncos country, and in today's video, we're going to be going over my way too early roster prediction for the 2025-26 season. Now, typically, I make a couple of these videos. I make this one, which is way too early. I make one right after the 3 weeks of the preseason ends, and then I do a follow-up of what the actual 53-man roster looks like. But this is just all good fun. This is just what I think is going to happen, and I'm going to give you some names potentially at the end who I was kind of on the bubble of potentially having make the roster. But with that being said, if you do enjoy, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel down below, as the support is greatly appreciated. And let's get straight into this. But first, I did actually want to go over the schedule because a couple of days ago, the schedule came out. And while I'm not going to go game by game and give my predictions, what I'm kind of thinking is if everything goes right and according to plan, I'm kind of thinking in between 10 to 12 wins here for the Broncos. Now, looking at the games, the primetime games are week 4 versus the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday Night Football. Then you got the Jets in week 6 going to London. Now, London isn't technically a primetime game because that's really early in the morning. It's a standalone game, but primetime games are at night. And then the next primetime game doesn't come to week 10 on Thursday Night Football versus the division rival Raiders. We're hosting that game on Thursday Night Football. Then in week 13 on Sunday Night Football, it's 2 up-and-coming young stars, Bo Nix for the Broncos, Jaden Daniels for the Commanders. That is going to be a very, very fun game in the Landover, Maryland. And then, of course, week 17, you got Thursday Night Football on Christmas versus the Kansas City Chiefs. And like I said, my immediate reaction was 10 to 12 wins somewhere in there. I like the week 12 bye week because it's late in the season. You're getting your players a chance to recharge, rest, and potentially nurse some injuries that have been lingering throughout the first 11 weeks. So I like the late bye week in week 12. But this is a gauntlet. There's some tough games early on, specifically week 5 versus the Eagles, the Super Bowl champions. I do think that is going to be a tough game. Even Monday Night Football versus the Bengals could be a tough game with them. Obviously, not making the playoffs last year, they're going to want to prove themselves. I think that could be a tough game as well, especially with that high firepower offense. We'll have to see what's going on, of course, with Trey Hendrickson and their defense. But overall, you know, I like the schedule. I like the opponents we're playing to prove ourselves, right? Versus the Eagles, of course, versus the Chiefs twice, versus the Commanders. There's some good teams, so, you know, I'm looking forward to this schedule. Those are just my early thoughts. I didn't script or plan any of this. Let me know what your thoughts are on the schedule down below. But let's get straight into this roster prediction. So starting off, of course, we have the quarterback position. And you can probably guess by how big or small the font is, how many players I'm keeping at each position. But starting off, of course, we got the starter in Bo Nix. I mean, this is a gimme. There should be no explanation needed. I do think the backup is still going to be Jarrett Stidham, though. He knows the Sean Payton's offense, right? He was signed to a contract extension this offseason and a multi-year contract extension at that. So I do expect Stidham to be the backup. But I do think Sean Payton liked having 3 quarterbacks last year, with Zach Wilson being the emergency third-string quarterback. And that's what I think Sam Ehlinger is going to be. Right, we signed him to a 1-year deal, and I do think he's going to be that emergency third quarterback. Obviously, can't come in the game unless the starter and the backup get injured, but can suit up and doesn't count against the active players that you, obviously, the players that you have active for the game, right? So you can have that additional quarterback active in case of emergency. And I think Sam Ehlinger could take a potential Zach Wilson-like path where maybe he sits and learns under Sean Payton for a year and then goes and tries to get a starting job elsewhere, right? Or he could potentially be the long-term backup as well, depending on what happens with Jarrett Stidham. But I do think the Broncos at this point in time are going to carry 3 quarterbacks on the roster. Moving to the running backs, to me, right now, as it speaks, I just have to put RJ Harvey as the starting running back, right? He obviously could be the RB2, but based on the other players we have in the running back room, I think RJ Harvey is going to be the starter week 1. I do think he is, in my opinion, the best back on the team. I know he's a rookie, and that's lofty expectations, but I do think RJ Harvey is the starting running back this season. I think McLaughlin, though, will get some carries as kind of a scat back type of role, or receiving back as well. So I do think Jaleel McLaughlin will get some touches as well, but I do still believe in Audric Estime, and I really like Audric Estime. He has the potential to be our running back too after McLaughlin is potentially gone, and he's kind of the power back, right? Not going to blow you away with his speed. He's just going to be a tank, and he's going to pick up those hard-fought first downs. One of the biggest problems with Estime last season, and especially at the beginning of the year, was how many fumbles he lost, but he really worked on that and really improved on that at the end of the year. So I do think Estime still has a big role with the team because Sean Payton does like to go with a running back by committee. Then I do have us keeping a fourth running back on roster, that being Tyler Bidet. You know, there are a couple of options here. I still like Blake Watson, who was an undrafted free agent last year, right? And there's a couple of guys who we signed an undrafted free agency who I do think could make a dent. But Bidet really played well last season when he was given the opportunities. Of course, had a very scary injury in week 5 against the Jets. That was week 5, right? Week 4 or week 5, one of the two. Had a very scary injury, but he showed flashes not only last season, but in previous seasons when he was kind of a practice squad, active roster, bouncing between the two. So I do like Tyler Bidet and what he could bring. And then Michael Burton, I do have as the fullback on the roster. This is an interesting one, though, because he has been the Broncos fullback for the past few years. But at the end of last season, the Broncos actually cut him, signed him to the practice squad, and then elevated him for every single remaining game. So it is interesting with Michael Burton, but I do think he makes the roster for the Broncos because Sean Payton does like to have a fullback in there for blocking reasons. And also he's run a lot more fullback dives with Michael Burton the past few seasons than I've seen in quite a while. But I do think Michael Burton makes the roster because obviously he knows Sean Payton, and I do think Sean Payton likes to have a fullback in Michael Burton. You could have Nate Atkins be your tight end fullback hybrid, but for right now, I'm keeping Michael Burton on here. Then as we move to the receivers, Courtland Sutton, I do expect to be the clear-cut X receiver for the Broncos. Then Marvin Mims, I do think is going to play that Z receiver opposite of Courtland Sutton. I do think you're going to have Devon Vele in the slot with Troy Franklin. I still am super high on Troy Franklin, and I still love the upside that Troy Franklin brings, and I'm hoping he can step up and be a really solid receiver for us. Obviously, last year he got open, he separated. Doesn't run the crispest routes, but he does get open. Needs to work on catching the deep ball, right? A couple of those went through his hands, but I still have a lot of hope and belief in Troy Franklin. Then I have Pat Bryant at 5, and this really isn't in order. You could put Pat Bryant higher than Troy Franklin. You could put him lower, but I do think Pat Bryant will play a solid role for the Broncos this season, right? I really do like Pat Bryant. He has grown on me as a draft pick, but Pat Bryant will be a part of this receiving room. And then, then you have Trent Sherfield, who will also be a part of the receiving room, but mostly as a special teamer, right? If you want to have 2 returners deep, if you want to have him play a gunner, there's multiple roles he can play on special teams, and that will be his primary. Primary role on the team. Will be a special teamer, but could potentially also see some targets and some snaps on the offensive side of the football as well. Then you're moving on to tight ends, and you got Evan Ingram, who he's a tight end, but he's mostly going to be a receiver for you. He's going to be another receiving option for the Broncos, and I think this is going to help Bo Nix out a lot, having a bigger target at the tight end position who is an athletic tight end. Let's make no mistake about it. He is going to be a receiving threat for the Broncos, and I think he is going to have a big impact on helping Bo Nix develop. And obviously plays the Joker role. I don't like to throw that term out because I've seen a lot of people on Broncos Twitter throw the term out Joker way too much, but he is going to fill that role in Sean Payton's offense. Then you got number 2, and that's going to be Adam Troutman. He's going to be your hand in the dirt, pure tight end, right? He's going to block. He's going to go out, run some pass patterns, going to catch the football. To me, Adam Troutman is going to be pretty much your pure tight end, right? Going to run a lot of 12 personnel, I imagine. So I do think Adam Troutman is going to be your pure tight end. Evan Ingram is going to be mostly a receiving tight end. And then number 3, I do have Caleb Lohner being that third tight end. And it was really tough not for me to have Nate Atkins on here because I really wanted to put him on here, but At this point, I do think if Caleb Lohner flashes in the preseason, I do think he could potentially take both Kroll's and Adkins' spot. And I know that might be an unpopular opinion. I know a lot of Broncos fans love Caleb Lohner, but not having one of those two on the roster, I do think could be controversial. But I do like the upside that he brings, right? 6'7", super tall. He's going to be a red zone threat and a red zone target. And to me, if you're keeping Burton, I don't know if you keep Atkins as well. Obviously, we'll have to see, but I do like the upside of Caleb Lohner, and I do have him being our third tight end. Could keep 4. What I have is keeping 3 tight ends in this roster prediction. Then for the offensive tackles, I have us keeping 4. Could keep 3 and maybe add 1 to the tight end room, but those tackles being Garrett Bowles as the starting left tackle, Mike McGlinchey as the starting right tackle. I like Alex Palczewski as the swing tackle, and then I kept Matt Pert on here because I know Sean Payton loves him. He kept substituting him in as an eligible receiver, as that extra lineman, right? So I think Sean Payton likes Matt Pert, obviously signed him to a contract extension this offseason. So Matt Pert or Pert, however you want to say it, I do think also makes the roster, and I think the Broncos keep 2 depth tackles on the roster. Then moving on to the interior lineman, Luke Wattenberg is going to be the starting center. I don't think that's really up for debate at this point. I think he won, obviously, the center competition against Forsyth last year, and he honestly had a sneaky good season last year. I didn't even realize how good of a season he had, but I think Wattenberg is going to be the starting center because of, obviously, his season last year, but him and the other offensive linemen, they're already gelled. They already have the chemistry to play with one another. Then you got Ben Powers at the left guard. I don't think that should be a surprise to anybody. And Quinn Miners as the right guard. That should not come as a shock to anybody as well. Then I have us keeping Clay Webb. I really, really like Clay Webb. I thought he was kind of a 5th, 6th round guy in this draft. Goes undrafted, right? Couple reasons I'm not going to discuss on here. But I do think Clay Webb makes it. Probably is going to be, I don't want to say backup center or guard. I think he can play both and is just a depth interior guy. And if an injury happens, which hopefully there's not, he'll go in and fill in for that position for the Broncos. Then I'm going to have Nick Gargiulo on here. I think you can either choose between him or Alex Forsyth on who you want to keep, but I'm going to have us keeping the 2024 7th rounder over the 2023 7th rounder, and it's really just kind of pick your poison. Who do you prefer? Who do you want? Could be Forsyth, could be Gargiulo, but Gargiulo spent all last season on the practice squad. Forsyth obviously was on the active roster, so Forsyth has that for him, but I'm going to go with Gargiulo this season as another depth interior guy. And then for the defensive line, of course, we got Zach Allen starting at left end. Of course, we run a 3-4 defensive system, so Zach Allen is going to be an interior guy, right? And then the outside linebackers are obviously the edge rushers. But then you got DJ Jones as your defensive tackle, as your nose guy. Then you're going to have John Franklin Myers at the right end position, with Malcolm Roach being a rotational guy, and I really like Malcolm Roach. He had a really good season and blew my expectations for him out of the water last season. And then Savion Jones, who a lot of people thought was going to be an edge rusher, but probably is going to move to the interior for the Broncos and is going to provide that interior depth for the future, and then could potentially take over and be a starter next year, with 3 of these guys being Zach Allen, John Franklin Myers, and Malcolm Roach all being free agents next season. So I do expect Savion Jones to be a rotational guy this year, develop, and then potentially even next season being a starter early on. Then you got the edge rushers, right? Nick Bonitto. I don't think you should be shocked by that. He was fantastic last season. Not at only getting pressure on the quarterback and getting to the quarterback, obviously, with the sacks, but getting quarterback pressures, and was stellar even when he dropped back in coverage, right? Had the pick 6 against Jameis Winston, and then has elite vision and recognition, being able to pick off the double pass from Anthony Richardson to Adonai Mitchell back to Anthony Richardson. It's classified as a fumble, but let's be real, that should be a pick 6. But yeah, Nick Bonitto, stellar player. Obviously the edge one on this team. Then you got Jonathan Cooper, who is a really solid player in his own right, and I think kind of underrated coming off the edge as well. Then you got Jonah Ellis, who was pretty solid in his rookie year as a rotational guy, had solid production for not playing many snaps and being a rotational piece off the edge. Then Dondre Tillman, who I do think the Broncos like. I think they're going to give him his shot on the active roster, right? Last season, I think in the offseason, the Broncos signed him to a 3-year contract or something, then cut him, signed him to the practice squad, and then late in the year got his opportunity on the active roster, signed to a 1-year extension this offseason. And I do think the Broncos like him and want to give him a chance as well. And then number 5, you got Q Robinson, who is a very toolsy player. Obviously didn't have the production and as much playing time in college as obviously he would like to. So I do think Q Robinson is still developing and I think will be a special teamer for the Broncos. But I do think he has upside and could potentially be an edge 4 on this team, edge 3, work his way up in the future. Think he's more of he's developing right now, but I still like the upside and the tools of Q Robinson. Then moving on to the linebackers, where we added Dre Greenlaw. I don't think there should be a question in anybody's mind that he is the linebacker 1 on this team. Alex Singleton, I do think is going to be starting next to him, depending on how everything looks with his ACL. I know we played the rest of the Buccaneers game, but still, coming off of an ACL injury, that's not easy coming back from. So it'll be interesting to see how he plays, but if he's healthy, I do expect Alex Singleton to start next to Dre Greenlaw. Then you got Drew Sanders, and I'm hoping this year he can fully develop. I don't think he's been given the fairest shake, or I don't think he's been given a full, how do I want to say this? He hasn't been given a fair shot, in my opinion, because we drafted him as a linebacker, and then we've moved him to edge, and now we're moving him back to linebacker. So he's been switching positions, right, every few seasons. I want us to stick with him developing as an inside linebacker and hopefully take over as a starting inside linebacker, because we spent a 3rd-round pick on him. Obviously, his rookie year didn't play a whole lot. Then last season suffered an injury and didn't come back till the end of the season. So I'm hoping this season Drew Sanders can develop and potentially even take over as a starter next to Dre Greenlaw in the future. Then at number 4, I'm having us keep Justin Strnad, and this one, I think you could go a couple different ways, right? I think you could go Lavelle Bailey. I think you could go J.B. Brown, right? But I'm going with Justin Strnad because if an injury does happen, which, again, hopefully it doesn't, he knows the system, he has experience, and he can come in and he can play solid for you. It's not going to be anything crazy, but he can come in and he can be a solid player for you at the linebacking position. Then the corners. To no one's shock, PS2 is CB1. I don't need to spend a lot of time on this one. Then I still have Riley Moss being that CB2 across from Pat Surtain. Of course, had a really strong start to the season. And then after he came back from his injury, kind of wasn't the same player. I'm hoping after a full offseason of rest and recovery, Riley Moss can get back to the level he was playing at. Then you got Jahdae Barron, who I do expect to be the starting nickel corner, right? Has the versatility and the flexibility to play on the outside or even back at a safety if you want him to. So he could potentially take Riley Moss's spot on the outside, but as of right now, I do have him as the starting nickel slot corner. Then you got Jaquan McMillan, who I still really like. Maybe didn't have the strongest finish to the year, but I still really like him as a player. And so he's going to be that 4th corner if you want to get an all defensive backs scheme out there, right? But yeah, Jaquan McMillan, I still really like. It's going to be interesting to see how much snaps he gets this year, but we'll have to see. Then you got Chris Abrams-Drain, who I still really, really like as a player. I thought when he filled in for Levi Wallace in that Pittsburgh game and even beyond, I thought he was really, really solid, right? We all expected him to be the backup slot corner, but with the addition of Jahdae Barron, it's interesting to see where Abrams-Drain slides in, but I still love the upside. I still love the potential of Chris Abrams-Drain. It's just how much playing time is he going to get? Probably going to play a lot of special teams, but how much defensive snaps is he going to get? That's the question. So for the development of Chris Abrams-Drain, it'll be interesting, but I really like this DB room in terms of the cornerback position. And moving on to the safeties, you got Talanoa Hufanga. He is going to be one of your starting safeties, right? Probably going to play mostly in the box, right? Going to be a physical hitter. But you got Talanoa Hufanga paired with Brandon Jones, who was really solid for the Broncos last season. I think this is going to be a heck of a 1-2 safety punch on the back end. And then for the depth safeties, right, you got PJ Locke, who was a starter last year. Didn't have the greatest year as a starter last year. But I do like PJ Locke as a depth safety who, if he needs to come in and fill in for a few snaps or play a game or two as a starter, I like as that kind of depth third safety. Then you got JL Skinner, someone who I was super high on back in the 2023 draft, and we got him all the way in the 6th round. I really like JL Skinner and what he brings to the table for the Broncos as this hard-hitting, thumping safety. He's not afraid to tackle and not afraid to lay a lick on you. So JL Skinner is someone who I really like as another safety. And then for the 5th safety, I do have Sam Franklin, who was signed to a 1-year contract this offseason, who I do expect to primarily be a special teamer, but is a safety by trade. Could get some snaps if you need him to, but I do think his primary role for the Broncos is going to be to play special teams. Then we're moving on to the specialist, Will Lutz. I do think is going to be the kicker. You can pencil that one in. I don't think we've signed a kicker unless I've missed some news. But I do think even if we have, I do expect Will Lutz to be the starter. He's a veteran. He's reliable. You don't have to go out and sweat and be nervous every time you're going to make a kick when Will Lutz takes the field. The punter, I do expect to be 6th-round rookie Jeremy Crawshaw, someone who I really liked in this draft. I talked about him in a video leading up to the draft, and I really liked him. I thought he was the best punter in this draft, and we got him. Obviously, the thing he needs to work on most is the hang time. I do think the altitude will help with that. But Crawshaw, I do expect to be the punter, especially since we released punter Matt Hack, or Hawk, however you want to say it, shortly after the draft and during or before rookie minicamp. I do expect Crawshaw to be the punter for the Broncos. And then the long snapper is Mitchell Fraboni. I know he's dealing with an injury right now, so we re-signed Zach Triner, but I do expect Fraboni to be the long snapper, especially since we signed him to a 3-year contract extension this offseason. Here are some other players that I do think could potentially make the roster. A lot of them are undrafted free agents, but my favorite one is Jerwan Newton. I really like his explosiveness. I really like his speed and his separation ability to make a play with the ball in his hands. Obviously, I don't think he's the crispest route runner. I do think he needs to work on that, but when the ball is in his hands, he is going to make a play, and he's going to find a way to score, right? Kind of someone with the ball in his hands is going to make a play, going to create the separation, has the speed, not the crispest route runner though. So there are some things to work on, but I do like Jerwan Newton as a potential another wide receiver for the Broncos to add. Then J.B. Brown, linebacker from Kansas, Lavelle Bailey, who was an undrafted free agent last year from Fresno State, who I really like, who I think could get a chance. Center Joe Mikowski out of my alma mater, Oklahoma State, I do think a very well could challenge for the depth center position. We'll have to see. Then I know a lot of Broncos fans love Travis Theis from South Dakota. Could be an intriguing option as that 4th running back. And then I really like Kendall Buller out of Florida A&M as a potential corner. And then someone who we just signed to the active roster from rookie minicamp, wide receiver from Utah State, Kyrese White. Those are some names to watch out for who potentially could make the Broncos active roster, final 53 roster. We'll just have to watch for them throughout OTAs and throughout minicamp and training camp, right? So, yeah, those are my predictions. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy today's video. And thank you so much for watching. My name is Parker, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.